Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. As I always say each and every time I come on air, I am bringing you important people in Stoughton who can bring important information that you need to know about. And that's no different today. Today I have the town engineer, a gentleman who I have known particularly during the time when I was interim town manager. He knows his job well. He wanted this job. He stayed in this job. And I don't think there's any other job that he had wants. And I know he's been there for over probably 15 years now, but I'll have him tell you how long he's been here and about his background and experience. So folks, I want you to help me welcome to the program today, Marc Tisdelle, who is Stoughton's town engineer. Hello, Marc. I hope you're well.
Hello. Thank you very much, Mr. Pista. Really appreciate it.
Well, again, and it has been a pleasure seeing you facilitate the engineering projects here in Stoughton. And certainly, we had some interesting times while I served as interim town manager, but I think I'd like to start the program by making sure that people know a little bit about you. So
Sure.
why don't you give them a sense of your background and experience, how you came to this position and where you may have worked prior to taking this position?
Sure. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Marc Tisdelle. I do have a relatively new title called Director of Development Services / Town Engineer. I'll get to a little bit of why that's that in a little bit. I've been in Stoughton for 10 years, almost 10 years in November. It feels like 20, but it's been 10. It's 20 in a good way. I actually live in Freetown. I have two kids, two younger kids. Before my life in Stoughton, I worked for a private civil engineering firm for about 15 years as a project manager, designing site development projects all over Massachusetts, permitting with the planning boards and conservation commissions, board of health, building departments in many different towns around. Locally, in Freetown, I actually ran for the planning board. It's an elected position and won a few years back. And then the kids came along and I didn't do that anymore. So I was on the planning board for 5 years. And I'm also president of a local softball organization in Freetown, the recreational softball organization. Recently, the current town manager, and it's been a transition through town managers, but generally my new title came under the current town manager, Robin Grimm. And she now is calling me the executive director of development services and town engineer. Essentially what that means is that there's a group of departments underneath me now that were not underneath me before. Engineering's always been there, board of health always been there, but now the building department is underneath me, the planning department, economic development, conservation commission, and then we also have a GIS division. And essentially with that, the benefit of all that is it just makes the departments communicate better. It's a more efficient operation. Everybody kind of knows what everybody's doing better than it was before.
Well, that's great. I mean, in terms of, I'm going to call you the czar of the many important tasks which the town must undertake. But I want to harken back to when I was there with you, and my initial thinking and memory goes back to when we had the young girl who was killed near the Hanson School on Central Street. And from that, you put together a team of people working along with police and others. You made some outreach to some of the councils to get monies to do things on Central Street. Why don't we start there with the conversation? Because that's a major project. And I'll just tell you how I wanted to talk about this and the time we're going to spend together. The Central Street project, Stoughton Center, and of course, the Park Street project. I think those will probably take up all the time that we're going to spend together, at least today. So why don't you start with the Central Street project, because that really was something. I believe you may have been the assistant town engineer at that particular point in time when you initiated that effort. So if you could talk about that and then move to the center of town and then to Park Street.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I'll try to consolidate this project and summarize it, because there's a lot of information. But you're right, there was an accident, I think in 2012, while you were interim town manager, of a little girl crossing the street because of the lack of pedestrian crossings in that area. And there was a project being permitted at that time, already permitted, the Taj Estates project. And part of their project was mitigation for that intersection. So we learned, obviously, by that accident, there was poor pedestrian crossings. We pulled together a group of people, all department heads, town managers, and figured out what's the best plan to improve that intersection from a safety standpoint. Obviously, a traffic standpoint is important, but people need to get through the intersection properly too. So now you see the push button signals, you see the properly sized crosswalks, and there's no more cutting across the street like you had to. And that's, unfortunately, that's what caused that horrible accident. Moving up Central Street, there was an improvement done to the Island Street and Central Street corridor intersection. Small geometric improvements, an island installation, things like that to make that intersection a little safer. We try when we plan traffic projects, we try not to do a project here or a project there in town. We try to do a corridor at once. So you'll see this as I continue in my presentation here. Going east towards the Tosca Drive intersection.
Well, before you go there, because I know the Taj development had some involvement with the reconstruction of that intersection that you're referring to, going up Island Street. Can you talk about that, how you pulled a development into meeting some of the financial obligations that were going to change that intersection?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that development got an approval, I think prior to I started here, through the Zoning Board of Appeals. And there was like a conceptual plan on file that they had to do improvements to the intersection. But in reality, what really had to happen had to be designed fully. They had to work with the town. And we worked with them to extend their scope, not just to the intersection of West and Central, but to include Island and Central too, because there's some issues with that intersection. So from Island to Central to our intersection we're just talking about, West and Central, they did all those improvements themselves. And they pretty much just because staff worked with them back and forth, and tried to show them that, it's not only going to benefit our community, but it's going to benefit their development. It's going to make their development a better area for the people living there.
So continue on, Mr. Executive Director of Development Services.
Kills me. So we move up the corridor. We're currently, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Tosca Drive, Central and Canton Street intersection. We actually got that programmed on what they call the state's TIP program, where if the town spends their funds to design the project and it makes its way through the TIP process, which is easier said than done, then the construction will be paid for by the state. Unfortunately, the process takes several years to get through due to permitting and design and public outreach. But thankfully, since we were able to get that project on the TIP, I have some notes. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. That intersection's programmed for the 2023 TIP. It's estimated at $3.8 million. So the town spent about $300,000 in design through town meeting articles, and we're getting $3.8 million in state funds. And then, again, if you have any specific questions, please reach out to me. There's a lot of detail for that intersection, but essentially it's going to be a signalized intersection.
Now, what's the intersection again, Mr. Town Engineer? Just wondering, was that the Canton Street you said?
Canton, Central, and Tosca Drive intersection.
Okay.
Yeah, right where Pine Park is. We've got a lot of good information on that.
There's another intersection, I guess that would be Canton Street and School. Is there anything planned for that intersection? That's a pretty busy intersection. And for some of us right there by the church, we would welcome a traffic light to help us get across, as you've done by the library.
Right.
So can you talk about whether that's something that's on your schedule while Mr. Cohen lets me know whether we can get you on to share the screen?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a high priority intersection. That intersection, we did a roadway safety audit with the local planning agency to figure out exactly what the issues were with all the local department heads and stakeholders. From that meeting, we actually did a full survey of the intersection. We currently have our engineers preparing design plans on it, preliminary design plans. The good news is we're trying to get that on the tip. And long story short is the project review committee through the state approved the project. So now we're trying to actually understand exactly what year that will get onto the tip. Again, the tip is a state program where the town spends the design monies and gets the construction for free from the state. And that will be a signalized intersection. And we're expecting maybe 2024, 2025, but we obviously can't state that just yet, but that's probably the time frame for that intersection.
Well, you have so much for us to talk about, and I've been authorized by Roy Cohen that we can go an hour. Would that be something that you would be able to do, Mr. Tisdale?
Absolutely, yeah, whatever you guys need. Yep.
Okay, well, good. I would like to do that because there's so many projects, there's so many things I want to explore with you. And when I have you here, I'm not going to have all those opportunities to do that. And I really want the viewing audience and our folks here in town to know exactly what you do. And we may cover now some of the other departments that are under you to talk about that as well. So if you will indulge me, I certainly would appreciate that. Let's move right up. We're moving right, heading towards the center of town. So let's talk about what's being planned. There's so much, there's the Friends of Stoughton Center. I know there's some redesign in there. I like the fact that you have the left turn heading up 139. So talk about those improvements and what else may be planned for the either Stoughton Center or its environs.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, as you can see, it's taken about 3 years to get to this point, but there's been some recent improvements to the downtown, to the square. From a traffic standpoint, we do have that dedicated left turn lane going up to 139. We actually have new signals in the square that have video. They don't take videos. It's called the technology. They're video detecting cameras that make the operation of the square the most efficient operation instead of having pre-timed signals. So, for example, if a car was sitting at the intersection and there was nobody else going through another movement, a pre-timed signal wouldn't recognize that. A video detected signal actually recognizes when vehicles are sitting and when they're not, and makes for the most efficient operation in the square. So hopefully you've seen a little improvement to that. We've also rebuilt the islands in the square. Instead of having the sloped granite curbing, we have nice new vertical curbing, new cobblestones. We have raised planting beds now. The DPW is working on a planting plan for those. You've probably recently seen 12, 15 new trees planted around the downtown. So those trees will grow. They'll fit in with the landscape very well in the downtown for an urban area. The parking lot, the town parking lot off Freeman Street, that was a big improvement. We added a nice green space over there. We buffered the parking lot from the main road for safety purposes and for streetscape purposes. We've actually got a nice green island there now. With I think 3 or 4 trees in it. So, we only have so much space. We wish we could do more. We can't put new lanes in and things like that. So we try to do what we can.
Well, is that, again, it sounds like to me that under your leadership, we have become better positions to learn how to apply for and to attract state dollars in order to do some of our transportation projects. And I'm not sure that historically has been the case. And so, let's talk about that. I mean, I think that the citizens in town need to understand that you have learned how to negotiate that by working with our state legislators and others to attract state dollars to help for some of our transportation projects. Let's talk about that a little bit, because it just doesn't happen. If you don't apply for it, you don't get it. So
right.
Talk about that whole process that you put into play here.
Yeah. Going back to my assistant town engineer days, I used to attend the joint transportation committee meetings at the Old Colony Planning Council. Not really knowing what they were, but all I did understand was that every year it seems like 3 or 4 or $5 million projects were getting fully funded in every other town except for Stoughton. And one of my goals at that point was, I got to figure out how to get some projects from Stoughton onto this program called the TIP, which I didn't know much about at that point. So over a series of years, you figure out who to contact, who to network with, and it's every project's a little different. But Old Colony Planning Council is a great contact. They help. They do a lot of the networking for us. They put us in contact with who we need to be, and what projects they think will work and not work. So they've been a huge resource. So now, in summary, I mean, we've got the Tosca Drive intersection, I think $8 million, I said. We got the Safe Routes to School project actually going under construction this year, which is a TIP project. That's about $3.5 million. That's improvements from Pearl Street all the way to our Tosca Drive intersection. There's going to be a new sidewalk and some improvements on the school property. And we also have another TIP project for the Route 138, Route 27 corridor. That's a $13 million project that the town's getting for free. That goes from Lincoln Street through Washington and Central all the way to York Street and signalizing the York Street Route 138 intersection there. So we've got 3 projects on the tip, and like I said, I think we're going to have Canton School Street very soon. That'll probably be a $3 million project. And we probably have more, but there is a recipe for this. They got to balance the dollars out with other towns and make it all work. So right now we've got 3 or 4 projects for the next handful of years, and I think that's a win for our town.
I'm just, I'm going to pick and choose because it's, at least by way of my observations, there has been some intersections where there have been a frequency of accidents. In fact, I've seen some recently, and I'm trying to remember, maybe that's York Street. I'm trying to remember the street that you come through from 138 heading over to 139, and there's a grocery store that's right there on the corner. Is that York Street? No, that's not York Street, because York Street is further down. I forgot the name of the street, but I know there's been several accidents at that intersection for some reason. And if you can,
oh, I know which one.
Do you know which intersection I'm speaking of? I can't remember the street. If you go up to the next light, you're at Central Street. If you come, if you come west on that, you're at you're at 138. And then there's a grocery store there, and you come past Stoughton, you come past senior housing and all of that area there. So right. That street there, I saw an accident the other day. It seemed like it's pretty. Is there any plans for that particular street? And why don't you name the street so everyone on our viewing audience will know exactly where I'm referring to?
Yeah, no, this stuff gets me excited talking about. So the Lincoln and Pleasant Street intersection is what we're talking about. Exactly what you're mentioning, but the issue there is it's a high crash intersection. This poor sight distances. The geometry is pretty well, but for years there was a large tree blocking sight distance. The tree has been recently removed by our DPW. But about, I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, maybe longer, but this year we've got an improved for that intersection by the select board. And essentially what we're doing is there's going to be new technology that senses when cars are approaching the intersection. It's called dynamic flashing, a dynamic flashing system. They might have a different title than that, but it monitors when cars come and the lights start flashing. So when cars approach the Lincoln Street intersection, they know that other cars are coming, and it just makes it a much safer intersection. Signalizing that intersection was something we considered, but you're going to have large backups, large queues. It would certainly make it safe. So we're trying to balance safety with operations on that intersection, and we're going to try out the dynamic warning system first.
With 4-way stop signs at all, I'm no engineer or traffic engineer. Would four-way stop, would that help, or would that still create the backup?
Yeah, that would even be a worse backup than a signalized intersection. Yeah, okay. The queues would be tremendous, hundreds of feet. I think I want to say 800 to 1,000 feet of queues during the peak hours. So, that was just not the best option at that point. We have this new technology we can try. Quite frankly, it's solar powered technology. If it doesn't work well, it can be picked up and put in a different intersection where it could be used, and we could rethink it. But I think you're going to see some drastic improvements with that type of technology. And some other small improvements we're doing to that intersection.
Let's move down to, I just want to give you all your kudos and the work that you're doing here in this transportation and engineering space. let's move down by the new library building at that intersection, which was not signalized in years past. And I can tell you, it was a, um, it was like, I don't want to call it bumper cars, but it was a matter of you had to play chicken in order to get across that intersection there for, I guess that's the Park Street intersection.
Right.
Um, Talk about that signalization, because I am sure that many of us are happy campers now in trying to get
Yeah.
across that or through that intersection. Speak about what that did. What was the state involvement? What was, let's, I want to give our governor and his department some, thumbs up as well, because that's been a significant improvement, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I mean well, we got to give everybody props, the state legislature, the governors, all that for a lot of these projects. But I will say that particular project was town forces, a team effort really. It starts with the select board approving the improvements. We were planning the project. DPW, contracted the project out, got it done. Police, fire, everybody had their say in that project. And the reason why that project happened was we were doing the square improvements. Okay, and again, we were talking about corridor planning. We don't want to just do a project here and there. We were doing the square improvements. Then we extended those up to that intersection, and we were doing Sumner Street, Park Street intersection improvements also. So we said, we might as well just connect the two and make improvements to this intersection. It just makes sense. Now that whole corridor from Sumner Street all the way to the square is complete. Actually, all the way to Monk Street is complete, because you can see there's been improvements on Monk Street. When the state Route 138 tip project picks up, it will pick up from that point all the way to York. So now you have from York all the way to Sumner Street complete. And then we've already talked about that Central Street corridor complete. So you kind of got the two main routes in town complete. So that project was affordable and able to be done through Chapter 90 funding and DPW funds pretty easily, because we were already doing improvements on each side of it. So the cost was cheaper than it normally would be if you went through the state process. If you went through the state process, that would probably have been a $3 million intersection. It ended up being probably 300,000 because we planned it right and we used Chapter 90 funds, and a lot of the improvements were going to be done as part of the streetscape project already.
Well, see, what I wanted to emphasize here is exactly that. I want folks to understand that if you don't plan, you plan to fail. And the reality is that because of your insights, your training, your experiences, your ability to reach out, because I can remember with regards to the Central Street project after that, that terrible accident on Central Street with that young girl, you reached out and collaborated with Old Colony. I think that may have been the initial contact that was made with Old Colony. And it seems to me that you've been able to integrate that into your planning processes, which has been a great savings. And hey, we always talk budgetary, folks always talk about, well, what's happening with my tax dollars? And I just wanted to underscore here that because of that planning that you do, you're saving the citizens of Stoughton uh, the utilization of their tax dollars, or the not as much of their tax dollars are going into get the benefits that we're deriving through these signalization and transportation projects. Would that be a fair statement, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of my job, Joe. That's what I try to do. So you guys pay me my salary, and that's my job, is to get these grants and get these funds, and I enjoy doing it, and I just look at it as part of my job. So, it'll keep on happening as long as I'm here.
Well, you've always been efficient and as well as humble, and I guess that works well for it. That's that engineer linear thinking that goes into play. So I'm glad that we have you, and that you want to remain in this capacity in this town. Before I want to get to the Park Street project, and then I want to broaden our conversation to talk about, now that you are a czar of several departments, I want to talk about some of the things in those areas, and that should probably take up the balance of the time. And I want to thank my producer, Roy Cohen, for giving me the opportunity to expand this time with you, because I think it would have been a loss to the citizens of Stoughton to not explore some of the other activities that you have under you at the present time. So let's talk about the Park Street project. That has been a debate for quite some time. I can remember it started even before me with town manager Crimmins, and maybe even before him. And met with various selectmen during my tenure about that. And now you have it at a point, you presented it to town meeting, got favorable a number of years ago. Talk to us about where that project stands. And as we talked about off air, we talked about the fact that under the transportation bill that's being discussed and debated right now by President Biden, that Congressman Lynch has presented that there may be an ability to get funding, an 80-20 funding relationship with 80% by the federal government, 20% by the town in order to accomplish that project. So why don't we talk about the history of bringing that project to where it is right now and what you may say as far as what may portend in the future.
Okay, yeah, very, very good. Yeah, to mirror what you said, we've have tons of files on that project dating back to the 70s and 80s. It seems like it's come up every 5 or 10 years since 1970, and it just never really got anywhere for whatever reason. So at the time when I was the assistant town engineer, it came up again. There was another town engineer at the realm. It came to town meeting, never went anywhere. Very well engineered, thought out project, but there just wasn't enough public outreach. People didn't understand the benefit of the project. Didn't understand why we were doing it first either compared to other areas of town. So we took a step back and we did what we call a sewer priority plan for the entire town, the bigger areas of town, not particularly side streets that don't have sewer, but the bigger areas that don't have sewer. And we ranked them on different criteria, pretty standard criteria. And then Park Street came back as number 1. So now we had a good foundation to start forward with that as our project. We came up with a design article for the 2019 annual town meeting, I believe, for $800,000 to design that project. We designed the project, went out for quotes. We actually had an engineer we were working very well with, very good engineers. But I said, I'm trying to save as much money as I can on this project. So we went out and actually went for quotes when we didn't have to. And we got the project awarded at $500,000. So we saved the town about $300,000 just on that standpoint. Got the project fully designed, came to town meeting last year, the annual town meeting, and got it approved for $7.5 million, the construction article. A lot of information with this article, with this project, but essentially there was a number of public outreach meetings that had to occur with different stakeholders, with the select board, finance committee. At the end of the day, town meeting felt comfortable with the information they were presented and approved the project. And now we are. Let me backtrack a little bit. After town meeting, I applied for a Mass Works grant. Again, knowing who to network with and how to do that part of it. We got a $2.5 million grant for that sewer project. So out of the $7 million sewer project, 2.5 comes right off of it. We've already got a signed contract with the state on that. We also we have a preliminary award with the federal government for $350,000 for another grant. We're working on the contract details now. So you got about 2.85 million that comes off the top. It makes it really affordable, much more affordable for the town and the people along that stretch that will get betterments in the future. And at the end of the day, the point of that project is it's not just a project for that particular area. It's a project that's going to benefit the entire town. And it's not just putting a sewer pipe in the ground. That's actually the secondary point of it. What the sewer does is it provides sewer to the industrial park and to the commercial properties on Park Street. Right now, those properties are restricted by septic systems. You only can make septic systems so large, so you only can have a certain type of use on those properties, such as warehouse buildings or things that don't use a lot of wastewater. With sewer, you have unlimited capacity for wastewater. So you can put a 6-story building on one of those properties, and you'll have enough sewer. You don't have to worry about septic systems failing. So essentially, it's an economic development project. A classic example of what's happening now is there's already a project almost in the final stages of the planning board and got permitted through the Conservation Commission at the end of Schuman Avenue for an 80,000 square foot expansion before the sewer is even in. And they need the sewer to make that project happen long term. It's actually a great project. It's an advanced manufacturing company. It's called Global Composites. The town actually voted on a tip for them recently. So over the next 10 years, I believe that they're going to be bringing in about an extra $600,000 in tax revenue to the town, just that one project. We have 4 or 5 to get these grants through MassWorks and the federal government. They didn't care about just one project. They wanted to know that, several projects were real. So they actually had us consult with every property owner in the industrial park and outside on those commercial properties and get 6 or 7 signed letters from them saying, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm planning, this is my time frame for my project. And there's one at the end of Campanelli, 175 Campanelli. They want to do a big expansion, 60,000 square feet. There's another project, 40,000 square feet. And there's 2 or 3 others that are being planned right now and engineered before the sewer pipe's even in the ground.
Let me, I want to, and thank you. That's extraordinary. That was one of the things that we had looked at in terms of the economic potential and the reduction in the tax rate for people, particularly residential, as you increase your commercial tax base, you can have an effect of decreasing the residential tax requirement. 2 things. I always know, those of us in government, we always use acronyms, and I'm sure the viewing audience may not know what a TIP is. So if you can just state what the acronym stands for. And then secondarily, there has been conflict. There have been those who have opposed it, particularly many folks who live on Park Street. But isn't there also an environmental concern with the septic tanks, the septic in that area as well? From an environmental standpoint, I believe that has been identified as a problem that exists right now. Could you speak a little bit about that, and also to tell folks, as I said, what a TIP is?
Yep, we'll get the TIP right away. The TIP is the state's Transportation Improvement Program. And that's essentially the program that every county has a certain amount of dollars they can spend, and it gets worked through your local planning agency. The projects get programmed through them. So that would be the Old Colony Planning Council for us. And essentially there's about $10 to $15 million in projects per year that get funded through that program, through usually 2 to 3 towns. Usually you'll see 2 or 3 towns on the TIP every year. Like I said, we've got those 4 projects programmed on the TIP over the next 4 or 5 years.
So the other thing that I talked about was, there was opposition. As with anything, you don't get total agreement. And I know there was opposition by some of the residents along Park Street, maybe even some of the businesses on there. And there's also a question of the environmental impact with regard to the septic. So those are 2 issues that I would like for you to address.
Yep. So the environmental issues with the septics, the thing about septic systems is that they treat sewage correctly if they're designed right and installed right. Well, a lot of the septic systems in that area are what we call cesspools. They're in place well before the state environmental code, which governs how to design septic systems by today's standards. So essentially what that means is a cesspool or a leaching pit is typically in the groundwater table or close to it, especially in that area that has high groundwater tables and ledge. So think about it. If you're dumping your wastewater into a leaching pit that's directly in the groundwater or close to it, you're not getting the treatment that you would with a properly designed septic system that's higher than the groundwater table. So you have more treatment. It's like a filter, as the sewage goes down through the ground, it filters the sewage. The problem with that area with the high groundwater tables and the ledge is that when somebody has to repair their septic system, they have to mound it. They have to raise it. So if you drive by some of the septic systems in that area that got recently repaired, or in other areas of town that have high groundwaters, you see a mound in the front yards. So what happens is you get the mound, you can't use that part of your yard for anything else other than your septic system. You could go sledding in the wintertime with your kids. That's about the only pro. And then so the septic system, has a cost associated with it. You got to maintain it. You can't just flush anything you want down the thing. And then it has a lifespan, usually 20 to 30 years, and then you got to do it all over again. With the sewer, you don't have to do that. The pipes in the ground, these pipes are plastic pipes now. They will last 75 to 100 years. Drastic improvement from a lot of the pipes in our town that got installed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that they called clay pipe. Those break down, and you got to replace them or do different treatments to them. So these pipes are around for a long time. You can just connect them very easily. You don't have to worry about the septic system. You don't have to worry about the environmental issues with the septic going into your water table. A lot of the houses around there have water connections, so it's not necessarily a well issue, but it's a general town-wide environmental issue, right? These groundwater tables flow underground to nearby wetlands and streams, and those streams flow in our town and out of our town to other communities. So it's a big picture thing from an environmental standpoint. It's not necessarily a lot by lot case,
And that's why I wanted to have you explain the environmental impact, because a lot of people that didn't register with the environmental aspect, and we've become increasingly, and I'm glad as a world, some of us, and certainly I won't get into the politics of climate change and environmental and our failure to look at some of the things that we should be doing, but we've become more sensitized to the issue of addressing the environment. And I wanted you to talk about that because, and one other issue which I know you have been able to debunk, and that was the issue, well, it's going to cost me a lot of money to be hooked up to the sewer versus what I'm having with, and as you said, cesspools as opposed to the the other. So talk about, debunk that financial argument and what you have proposed to mitigate. Not so much debunk. I'm going to be nicer because you're a nicer person. So you want to mitigate what people talk about in terms of the cost to them. What has been the explanation around that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a cost to septic systems and sewer. Nothing's really free, but from the sewer standpoint, and again, these aren't decisions that I necessarily made. I present information to the select board, and then they vote on certain policies. And for example, on this project, they voted on a 75% betterment. A betterment is essentially once a project's complete, the town pays for it. They know what the cost is, and then they divide it evenly among the people who use the sewer in that project area. So everybody gets a bill that can be paid over 20 years. That bill for that particular project, for say a single family home, 3-bedroom home for that area, I think at town meeting last year, we presented it to be around $10,000. Don't quote me for dollar. It's around 10,000. And I think the select board's idea when they voted that the 25% policy of the town paying 75% of it and the betterments being issued at 25%. So 25, when I say 25%, I mean that if the project came in at $1 million, which it's not, $250,000 would be distributed for betterments to the people along that stretch. So for every dollar spent, the town's paying 75% of it. So you're only paying 25%. You still got to pay 25%, and that equated to $10,000 at that point in time. And you still, after the sewer is installed, you get a stub to your property line, but at that point you have to connect your house to it, and that's on you. So that's going to cost you, with a typical house location, around $5,000 to $10,000, and that's going to be roughly $20,000 to connect. A septic system in that area to repair, 25, 30, 35, every site's different, but they're going to be up there and they're going to be mounded. They're going to have most likely be mounded. They're going to restrict a part of your property. You're probably going to have a pump system, which means if you have no electricity, you're going to have a backup generator system to keep that thing working. So that was the logic behind the betterment in the price. And again, you never have to repair your sewer again, like you would with a septic, and you don't have to maintain that sewer pipe like you would with a septic. But since that approval, we've gotten all these grants. The design plans have progressed, so there's less contingency and the numbers are lower than they used to be. So that number is closer, that betterment number is closer to around $5,000 now. So that number's dropped in half. Approximately. Don't quote me on the exact number, but it's around $5,000 for a single family 3-bedroom house. So I think we've made it as affordable as we can for every resident, every business in that area.
Well, Mr. Town Engineer, I really appreciate that explanation because I like to deal with facts, and I don't like disinformation. And that's what is often fuels some of the conversation is people have disinformation, misinformation, or deliberate intentions to change the facts. And so I'm glad to have you lay out exactly what were the considerations and the efforts that you and our town officials have made in order to mitigate any type of cost to the individuals. Let me shift over a bit because we're running out of time here because we have so much to talk about. Let me talk about two issues which have been of interest to me with regard to the departments that are under you. One is the building department and its enforcement of the building department code, the code here, which I've argued before. We have boats and people putting up storage facilities on in residential areas, and I don't see that much as I drive through other towns, and I'm not sure to what extent we have enforcement for that. And then the whole question that our review of our zoning code, I know we're doing it piece by piece, but and this isn't just a Stoughton issue. I do zoning in the city of Boston, and I think our code was 1965 or maybe even earlier than that. No one goes around updating their code repeatedly. Can you talk about what some of the thinking is around both of those issues, the enforcement aspect under the building code and the other one as far as our zoning code?
Yeah, no, very, very well. Well, as everybody knows, the building inspector is the chief enforcement officer in the building department. His name's Jack Erickson in our town. He's a great guy, very thorough. But unfortunately, right now it's only him in that department. There is another funded position that I believe got put in place last town meeting for a code enforcement manager. That person will be directly involved with going around town, looking at those hotspot issues like you just mentioned. Unfortunately, we've gone through a round of posting that job and haven't got great resumes in, or resumes at all. We've gotten literally less than 5. So we're going to try getting somebody into that position that's qualified and can do the job. We certainly don't want to hire somebody just to hire somebody because we want this person to be qualified and be able to do that job. So I think you'll see in the next handful of months somebody in that position. I'm hopeful. And once that position comes to fruition, enforcement will be definitely picked up from a zoning perspective. Right now, Jack's he's doing his inspections, he's doing his plan reviews, the basic priorities of that department. So there hasn't been a lot of enforcement to this point.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that because I still remember again when that position was authorized because it was definitely needed. And again, I do harken back to just as I've given here the description, you see folks with boats sitting in yards and when they should be housed or docked elsewhere and all of that. So my sense is I'm glad to see that that's moving forward. It's something that's definitely needed and hopefully we'll be able to do that. I know conservation, I don't know, animal control doesn't come under you or does it?
Yeah, well, yeah, so there's some of these boards and committees, they're not under my control, but their agents are. So for example, for the Conservation Commission, they're a committee in town. That commission is not under my control or anybody's control. They're under their own control. But their agent, James Conlon, for example, is under he reports to me. And he has been, actually. That's been one thing that hasn't changed since I've been here. That's always been under engineering. And he does a great job. From an enforcement standpoint, from a conservation standpoint, very thorough. That commission's always picking up on what shouldn't be happening. For example, the Goddard Highlands project had a discharge from their construction site during a big storm. All kinds of silt discharged from the construction site through our drainage pipes into a nearby wetland resource area. And they stayed on the developer and fined him and issued him an enforcement order. And that's just one example. So from a conservation standpoint, they're doing a good job from an enforcement perspective.
So just while we're looking at it, obviously you talked about a number of projects that are being planned commercial or otherwise, and I know that the zoning code comes before the planning board. or at least the enforcement of the zoning code. And if one wants to get any variances, they need to come before planning, and they may even have to come before building, starting with building, then the planning board, and then maybe conservation as well. How are things working out as far as the integration of the planning board responsibilities? Are we getting better at what we're doing? I know there's been oftentimes historically complaints about things that are being done, and I'll raise them. You know, what happened with the construction of the police headquarters, the construction of the fire building over on Central Street. Are we getting better at what we do in that regard? And hopefully being under your aegis, that may enhance it as well. What's your sense?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this comes down to doing your due diligence up front and making sure you do that. Being an engineer, that's the most important thing. You know, for example, before you start putting a 100,000 square foot building on a property, you have to know where the wetlands are, what kind of utilities you have, what kind of soils exist. You know, the list goes on. So doing your due diligence up front, which we'd like to do in our departments now, is very important to lead people in the right direction to getting the right project. I've recently, as simple as it is, I've recently came up with a process to invite all the stakeholders, all the important department heads. It's called a pre-submittal meeting. All the important department heads meet up with the developer, with their plans. They don't have to spend $30,000 with an engineer to design these plans. They just kind of say, well, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm doing. What do you guys think? And that's where these initial big picture issues can come up. If a building is going to be built on a wetland, you know, like one of the buildings you just talked about, or a property with a high groundwater table, or a hazardous waste spill, we can nip it in the bud at that point. And that developer can shift gears, either, you know, drop the project in total or redesign it to meet their needs. But these initial meetings, we put a lot of time into them so that the final product is what the town wants and what the developer also wants, you know, in a way. So.
I muted myself so I wouldn't interfere with all the great information that you were doing. So let me get back on track here. You know, this gets to what I said earlier about the type of planning and coordination, and I commend our town manager for thinking about it from the standpoint of the big picture of being able to put these various departments under you, because the work that they do really are impacted by what the work of the others do. And if they're not speaking with each other, that's how we get the disconnect. So I think that's a positive determination or decision that was made by Robin, and I definitely applaud her for that. Tell me how things work. One of the areas that I was very much concerned about when I was interim town manager was how we did in economic development, and looking at how we do our selection of our contractors, how we look at our economic development, um, you know, persons who will provide the economic development here in the town of Stoughton. How is that working now with regards to how we do our RFPs and things of that nature, and how that works with all of your departments that we're speaking about here? Because once again, I believe economic, if I'm speaking about the right department, they will be very much involved with some of the RFPs and things that the town would have to be involved with. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, now that Pam McCarthy, she's our economic director, economic development director right now. She's great at her job. She knows what to do. She coordinates all that. A lot of times she's the first point of contact when a business wants to come to town. They'll call her. We educate her on what the permitting process is, and she can generally talk about it. What she'll do at that point is she'll reach out to me. She'll reach out to our building department. We'll have one of these meetings I just explained to you to sit down with that prospective developer, to give them options of what they want to do. If there's an RFP involved, you know, we would guide them in that direction. Obviously, our procurement officer would be involved also to make sure the RFP is designed and generated to meet town and state standards. Pam's great. Right now, she's working on the grant program, the small business grant program. And she's, I don't know the number, but it's up there. 20, 30 grants have been issued to small businesses struggling because of the pandemic. The projects are endless for economic development. Pam is only one person. We're trying to build her, her department up to offer more services to the town. And it's slowly going. This year, we've increased her budget to give her some money for a consultant to help her out with some of these grants that she could go for. So it's moving in the right direction. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see a little more activity from a consultant line, maybe some more staff for that department.
So our time, we're running close to, and I'm keeping clear sense of the time that we have here. I gotta keep Roy Cohen happy, so I don't want to run over as I did recently. So I always like to get a sense, you're in a position, your responsibilities have expanded. We've talked a little bit about all the things you're trying to do. What are some of the needs? If I said to you, I'm sitting there at a town meeting and I'm saying, Mr. Town Engineer, okay, forget what the town manager is going to say. I'm going to give you an opportunity to say, to do what I think needs to be done with what is within my bailiwick and responsibility. What would I, and I had the best world and I had all the resources that I could ever have. What would you say would be the needs that you would want to address?
I would say if they could clone me, that would be the first number one on that priority.
I love your modesty. I love your modesty. Go ahead.
But since I've taken on this new role, I will be honest with you, I'm not as much of an engineer as I used to be. I don't let go of it. I'm involved. I still do reviews on projects. I'm heavily involved in all aspects of engineering, as you could guess. But my right-hand person is Craig Horsfall. He's the assistant town engineer. Honestly, I could not do what I'm doing right now without having a great assistant. So he's been picking up the slack on that, and he's been very busy. So I greatly appreciate what he's done. And the other person that's very key to our operation up here, everybody is very important. I want to make that clear. But Kristen, our administrative assistant, she really runs the show. I will be honest with you, a little more administrative help would go a long way to our department. I could go on and on about different. If I had another engineer, I would make them useful. I would save the town money. I would get more grants. But
well, this is your time. I mean, listen, I can assure you that your job is not in jeopardy. I really want, because I want so when people are looking in town meeting and they're looking about where we're spending our dollars, I've already given you an opportunity to say how we're saving dollars. And I know that those are the selectmen and the town manager and the finance committee, and all of them have to look at those things. But I would like for you, in the short time that we have about a minute or two, just lay out the list. I would want another engineer, and I would want some more people in building. Come on, give me your elevator speech. You're talking to me now. I'm the interim town manager, and you're sitting in a meeting with me, and you're saying, "This is what I need to make it work." Talk to me.
It's all working right now, Joe. It's working.
Oh boy, you are consummate politician. Boy, Mark, you're good. You're good and that's exactly the way that you did working with me. You're a team player, and in terms of, well, I'm going to push the town manager the next time I have an opportunity to speak to her. But our time is running out. This has been a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to chat with you. You always have access to us here at a community forum. I want to thank my producer, Roy Cohen. I want to thank Michael Hammond. I want to thank Rob Roteller, who I think does some of the editing around here and assist Roy. And I want to thank Davis Young and others that make this work. I want to thank you for taking the time to spend even a longer time than we had anticipated to do this program. So again, take care. Want to make sure that you and the family remain safe.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Roy, too, for hosting us.